Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about everything board game related. Today we're going to take a look at The Flow of History by Jesse Lee. This is a game that's coming out from TMG, David.
Yeah.
It just was released at Essen this last year, was just picked up. It is a 3 to 5 player game. Very cool, because it takes you all the way from ancient history to modern history.
Yeah, it's like a civilization building game. More than that, it almost seems like you're just kind of like grabbing moments in history, as the name would imply.
So it's basically card drafting. It's just a card-driven game. And in the game, you're going to be playing through multiple different ages, right? In the ages, each of the ages has different kinds of cards in it. There's culture cards, there's leaders, there's monuments, there's military cards in there. And you're going to be drafting these cards in a way, basically.
Kind of an auction-y draft.
Yeah, in an auction-style way, but it's interesting how the auction portion works. So actually, let's walk you guys through the setup first, because it's an extremely easy game to play. At the start of the game, each player is going to be given one of these starting cards, and they represent a particular ability for you through the course of the game. Some of them give you abilities, some of them just give you flat-out victory points.
Right.
The victory points in the game are actually culture, and by the end of the game, the person with the most culture wins. However, as I said, each of these is going to start with a very basic thing. Mine here is harvest, and you have over there a military.
Yeah, military. It kind of gives players a gentle nudge in a particular direction.
There are generic resources, which could represent anything. Each player is going to start with 4 of these resources. There are 2 resource banks in the game. There is a supply bank, and then there is a reserve bank.
Right.
The supply bank is basically what you're going to be pulling from and manipulating through the course of the game, and then the reserve bank is off to the side, which stuff will add stuff into the supply. And then you're going to deal out X number of cards depending upon the number of players. In a 3 and 4 player game, it's 5 cards. In a 6 player game, it's 6 cards. And all these cards are numerically ordered in here, so you'll mix up all the 1 stack and mix up the 2 stack and then lay them on top of each other.
Right.
At the very bottom of the stack, you have something called the future, and this triggers the end game. When a player either draws this or it's added to the market, that triggers the end game, and then players will score up all the points that they've accumulated through the course of the game. So the game works like this. There's basically like 5 actions that you can take on your turn, and in turn order, each player is going to take one of those actions. So let's take turns and talk about how these work.
So the first thing you can do is invest on one of the cards. So like Jeremy said, this is a card drafting, but it's not as simple as like, I want this.
Yeah.
So you've got to take some amount of resources, and again, this is going to depend on what you have.
Yeah.
And you're going to place that in amount of resources on any card that has no resources on it now.
Right.
And what you're doing there is, one, sort of staking your claim for a card that you might want.
Right.
There may be other reasons you want to do this too, though. You might be putting resources on a card you know someone else wants. Because, as Jeremy will get into probably in a couple minutes here, there's another action that comes into play there.
Right.
But you're going to put an amount of resources on the card. Basically, when you invest, if it comes all the way back around to you and your investment's still there, you can take the card.
Right. So that is investing. So if I choose to invest on this card, I can do that and place, say, for instance, 2 resources.
Right.
If it gets back around to me, I can do a different option, and this is the second thing you can do, and that's called completing.
Right.
If no one has sniped it from you, and we'll get into sniping in a moment, what happens is these resources will go into that communal pool that we talked about called the supply. You'll get your marker back, and then you get this card. The first thing that happens is you have an investment bonus. And each of these cards has a little icon up here in the upper left-hand corner. If you have that icon on your board, you get to do some kind of investment depending on what kind of card it is. And then you're going to place this card with any other cards of that same type. So this is a harvest card, as you see in the bottom corner, and I have a harvest card already. So you're just going to lay that on top. Any card that you collect in the future that is the same type of another card, you lay it on top of that type.
Right.
And most of these give you either a one-time ability, which are these arrows down. Some of them give you actions that you can use every round.
Yeah, the little gear symbol that you can tap.
Some of them give you one-time attacks. The attacking in the game is basically when you acquire the card, if it has an attack symbol, the attack happens, and then it's done. And there's 2 basic kinds of attack. There's a regular attack, and then there's attack all, which attacks everybody at the board. And attacking is so simple. It's basically just adding up your power against everyone else's defense. So once you acquire the card, it just goes face out in front of you, and a new card comes into play, and that's called completing. The next one is sniping. This one's interesting.
Yeah, so sniping is interesting. As we were alluding to, you could put out an investment. So say Jeremy's put out 2 on that card. So if it comes around to him, as he just said, he could complete it. But if before that time, another player wants to snipe that card and take it from Jeremy, he has to pay Jeremy the same amount that's on that card. So I would lose 2 and go to Jeremy. These 2 are going to go to the supply.
Right.
Now, I'll get this card, but just like when you're completing, there's some different things that happen.
Right.
There's some money that I'll get. There's some money that Jeremy will get for being the investor in that card.
Right.
And this, when these things happen, it happens in a few different ways, but it usually comes directly from the supply, and then whatever's left in the supply is divided up in some fashion.
Right. It's interesting, too, because there's icons in here called trade icons. When someone snipes something from me and you've been collecting icons that have the trade on it, and I don't have any in front of me, you get to take a particular portion from the supply, depending on how many icons. So if there's 8 resources in the supply and you have 8 trade icons, you're going to take all 8 of those.
Exactly. So you can build up a little engine there where you kind of want people to snipe your cards.
Right. Not the other thing that also happens when you get something sniped from you, you take half of what's left in the supply as well. So there is a benefit on placing all of your stuff in there, knowing that, yeah, I didn't really want that, but I'm going to get my stuff back with my trade, and then I'm going to get half of whatever's left in there with something else.
Right.
With the investor. Now, the problem with sniping is that you don't get that investment bonus that we spoke about before. You just strictly get the card, but you do get any of the actions on the card too. So if it's an attack card, you get to attack. If it's a one-time effect card, you get to do whatever it says on there.
Right. It makes for some interesting gameplay because when you're putting your investments out there, I found that it's equally about placing it on cards you want and sometimes often placing it on cards that you know other people want.
Right. The fourth action you could take on your turn is called activating. Some of the cards in the game have an activation bonus on it, such as this one here. It's a little gear symbol, and that simply means on your turn you can activate it. It doesn't force you to invest in anything or complete anything or snipe anything. It's just a one-time action that you get to take with this particular card. And the last one is Harvest. Do you want to talk about Harvest?
Yeah, so Harvest, I have to admit, I've never done any harvesting because Jeremy hoarded all the harvest cards in the first game. That's why I think you should probably explain the harvest.
So in the
it's the simplest one.
Yeah,
I think.
in Harvest, basically, you're going to count the amount of harvest icons that you have, and then you're going to take that many resources and add them from the reserve into the supply. So right now I have 2 harvest icons. I'm going to take these 2 and I'm going to add them into, say there was a reserve already of 3 out here. So it's going to create 5.
Right.
And then I'm going to count the amount of resources in the supply and take half of those rounded down. So basically you're adding stuff into the resource pool, into that supply pool from the reserve, and then you're taking half of that.
Right.
So as I said, a lot of these icons do certain things for you at different times. There's a lot of different strategies in the way that you acquire the icons.
And there are quite a few icons in this game.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's basically your 6 major icons, which represent all the different things like trade and science and industry. A lot of those key off the investment bonuses that you get when you acquire them.
Right.
And then... I mean, it's really that simple. It's looking at the card and then keying off whatever you have.
Right.
I know the first time we played this game, you weren't really into it. Right?
You know what? The very first time, I wasn't at first. By the end of the game, I got more into it. I do think this is a game that you've got to get a game under your belt, particularly to get your head around all those icons. And when I said that about the icons, not only are there icons that trigger in the game, but the artwork in this game, too, in effect, is very iconic. It's a very iconic game.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool game. I think the look of this, people will love or hate. But it just took a little bit to get my head around the game before sort of getting into the groove.
Yeah. The other thing that when the game is triggered, as I said, that future card, when it comes out, you're going to count all of your culture icons. Through the course of the game, you're going to be acquiring icons that look like this harp on the side. You're going to count up all your victory points there, but you also get victory points for every 2 icons that you have, you get a victory point. So your tableau, you're going to count all those and get 1 victory point per 2. And there's a lot of cards in the game that give you victory points for having specific things. A lot of the monuments that you get through the course of the game will give you victory points for particular like industry tiles, or whether you not have science tiles or defense tiles or whatever those may be. So you're going to count up all those, and the person with the most points wins. So.
Yeah, there's basically a lot of different, like any good civilization building game, there's a lot of different routes you take. You know, at the end of the game, I might be heavy military, you might be heavy industry or harvesting and things like that. Which may, you know, this game does that very well. It doesn't, like I said at the very beginning, it doesn't feel as much to me like you're building a civilization. You know, it's not like locations or things like that you're building for the all the time. It almost feels like you're just kind of grabbing pieces of history as it goes by.
Right.
Like I said, Flow of History is a very appropriate name, because you're going through here, and as Jeremy said at the beginning of the game, these are numbered decks, so it basically goes through time, and you're gonna, you know, start very, very, very basic, and then get all the way up through, you know, like nuclear fission and things like that.
Yeah. I like the game. I think it's really cool. I think it's there's a lot of meaty decisions in here. There's only like 67, 68 cards in the deck. So as you said, it's a game that you have to play once and understand what the possible combinations are in the game. Because the first time through, you're just like, oh, I had no idea this was an ability, or that something I'd done in the first round could key off something that comes up in the third age. So once you get that first game under you, you start to understand the mechanics and what's viable and what's not viable, and how many of each of the those particular cards in there. Because I'm not sure you've done this, but I've gone through this deck and I've looked through there, and there's the same number of cards in each of them. So you're going to get the same number of defense cards, the same number of attack cards, the same number of harvest cards in them. So you'll go into it the second time knowing that if I'm going a harvest route, I know they're going to come up here and I have to go hard to them. So I have to build my resources in order to be able to complete that one or snipe it from somebody else.
Well, and the other thing, too, about this, compared to most other civilization building games, the sniping, the investing, it's interesting. This is from this designer. It definitely gave me a Ponzi scheme feel. That whole point at which you put an investment on a card, which most of the people at the table go, wait a minute, he doesn't want that card. He's just making it difficult for me to decide whether I want to snipe it or whether I want to let him have that card, which felt a lot to me like when you're handing that envelope of money over in Ponzi scheme. It's this very sort of like, what are you up to? Which you don't feel in a lot of other civilization building games.
Yeah. I like the game, guys. I highly recommend it. I know you're so on it, but I enjoy it a lot. That is The Flow of History by Jesse Lee, coming out from TMG sometime this year.
Sometime in 2017, for sure.
Yeah. Make sure you guys make comments below. Subscribe to us, please. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. And everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple.
Bye-bye.
Season 1 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored by TMG Games, publisher of great games like Yokohama, Guilds of London, and the soon-to-be-released Colosseum.